Good evening. You earn more sitting on your backside than going to work in Benefits Britain. We used to laugh at people like this.
Meet the jobless Phillips family, who have lived off state benefits for the last 20 years.
There's nothing to encourage me to go back to work. I'd just rather lie in bed and do nothing.
Now, they're everywhere, and loads of them aren't even British. Around 40% of British workers are earning less than people claiming benefits. So get this. Unemployed people on sickness benefits will soon receive $2.5 grand more a year than a minimum wage worker. A jobless single parent claiming for anxiety and for a child with ADHD would receive almost 37 grand a year. That's £14,000 more than a worker on the national minimum wage. Number of children claiming disability benefits has doubled in the last 10 years. Can you imagine what you would earn if you had 2 kids with ADHD? I mean, it is possible, by the way, to get an ADHD diagnosis without a face-to-face appointment. So you can just make it up, use your kid as a cash cow and ponce off the state forever. There are 1,000 people signing on for benefits every single day. Now, this will wind you up. Households with at least one foreign national are claiming nearly £1 billion a month in benefits. So, right, fantastic, isn't it? 12 billion quid a year goes in benefits to households with a foreigner in it. Mad. 1 in 5 new cars are for the Motability scheme, for people who say that they need the taxpayer to pay for their vehicles so they can just get out and about. Well, here are some of the problems people are getting cars for. Are you ready? Food intolerance, 20 cars. Failure to thrive, right? 10 cars. What is that? Constipation, 20 cars. Tourette's, 230 cars. A frozen shoulder, 150 cars. I mean, these two are interesting. Drug misuse, 220 cars. Yeah, give that smackhead a car. Absolutely. Alcohol misuse, 770 cars. What could go wrong there, eh? Generalised anxiety. I'm not surprised they're anxious, by the way, if we've got loads of people who are alcoholics and druggies driving around. But anyway, generalised anxiety, 1,030 cars. Stress, 20 cars. Depressive disorder, 7,460 cars. Obesity, 800 cars. Presumably they should be minivans or something. Dyslexia, 320 cars. And tennis elbow. Yes, tennis elbow, 40 cars. Brilliant, isn't it? Magnificent. Why are we paying for anything? In 5 years' time, Britain's benefits bill will be around 100 billion quid a year. What will you say when Labour ask you to pay more tax so more people can claim benefits? Let's get thoughts from our panel this evening. We've got the former Tory MP Anna Firth. We've got the Reform Councillor Jane McIver and former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Thank you very much. Anna, this is, well, it's insane, isn't it?
That is completely insane. And that article that you went through about the family with the child with ADHD receiving £37,000, that's equivalent to earning £45,000. So this is completely unsustainable. And, of course, you know, this is something which Labour is not going to tackle. They had their flagship bill, was 16 pages to try and reduce the welfare by 5 billion, reduced to 2 pages, and it's actually going to cost us money. So I'm afraid that this is something where, you know, we can't trust Starmer to do anything about this. And the truth of the matter is that actually, this is an area where the Tories were making progress. Before COVID...
Is it? What?
Before COVID...
Anna, you inherited... these figures are all from under the Tories, Anna. I mean, nice try, but all of those figures are from when you were sat in Parliament.
Before COVID, remember, we all had COVID, and then that was everything was...
And every other country's not had the same thing.
We had the lowest number of workless households in history.
Let me just put
and after COVID, the highest number of claims ever.
Why do you think that was, Matthew?
Because your government didn't do anything about it, Anna.
And if we'd had your government in power, we'd have had a longer lockdown, we'd have had more money wasted.
Well, I'll tell you what, let me just put in Jamie, because... Hang on, let me just come in, because it's all very... You had a very nice time there whilst Tory and Labour were shouting at each other, but don't Reform want to scrap the 2-child benefit cap? That's not a popular policy. That's not going to help with this, is it?
Listen, I adore them both. They're both as bad as each other in terms of their parties. Let's be real here, that I'm all for someone being in a bad situation, the government stepping in, being like, right, let's get you out of jail for a minute, whether that's single mum, suddenly, traumatic circumstances. People that do get certain conditions, it is all awkward to then go to work if you're unwell. We all get that. What is wrong here is that we are now creating a life of dependency. We're creating a life where actually don't be ambitious, don't worry about your career. You can have a career at the expense of the taxpayer, and that is what's wrong. And when you look at things like the Motability, for example, I'd like to know how many of those households are actually having home-to-school transport at the expense of local authorities. This is a far bigger problem.
It is. I'm just going to press you a bit on that reform policy, the two-child benefit cap, scrapping that. I'm not sure that's that popular, is it? Would you be in favour of that, really?
Well, to be honest with you, I think what it's about is actually encouraging families and supporting British families. That's what that policy is about. I do support it. What I will say is I understand criticisms. I understand criticisms of the policy. But the difference between the Reform Party and, I'm afraid, the other parties is actually we're listening to people.
Okay, go on then.
You are a self-employed, self-made man, and I don't believe that you're the sort of person who thinks that people should have children that they can't afford. And that's exactly what Nigel is doing with that policy. He is encouraging people to have children which they can't afford to support themselves.
But we also need to have a British army. We also need to make sure our population continues to grow.
We won't have any army with this level of spending.
Let's bring Matthew in here. I mean, look, what are Labour seriously going to do? And we kind of knew what they wanted to do. And actually, you don't hear these words escape my mouth very often. But initially, some credit for Sir Keir Starmer and for Rachel Reeves, what they were initially planning on doing and what they wanted to do. But it was the backbenchers in Labour that he then caved into, and now we're screwed, aren't we? I mean, if 40% of people in Britain are worse off in work than on benefits, it's cooked, isn't it?
Well, look, I mean, I agree that the situation is unsustainable. That's what the government thinks. Just on the disincentives to work, I'll come back on the thing. But actually, so this report today is from a think tank founded by Ian Duncan-Smith, the former Tory leader. It's a sort of right-of-centre think tank. And the director of it said today, the policy director said, Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, deserves credit for tackling the perverse incentives that have crept into the welfare system since COVID. Labour sorting out a problem inherited from the Tories. Because the detailed thing is is the incentives to get people back into work. Now, on the bill that was...
I'm not trying to be... No, I just want to get out of this very clearly, and I'm not trying to start an argument. I don't know the answer to this question, right? So I really want to know, what are now the incentives to get back into work under Labour?
Well, the incentives to get back into work is the work support programme, which is why the bill at the moment does cost more money. Anna is right on that, but she's wrong on the fact that Labour isn't going to cut the bill overall, because what's happening is that the criteria have to change. This is the criteria for how you get effectively disability, including mental health related payments. So what the government is doing is it's getting one of its ministers to do a swift review by the autumn, which is going to come back with a different set of proposals, but there are still going to be cuts. And yes, those Labour MPs who think that you can't cut anything are wrong.
I agree. One thing I actually agree with Matthew on here is I do actually think that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves had the right idea. They actually get the fact that the economy is out of control, but they haven't been able to do anything about it because the reality...
Your car party did nothing about it in power, Anna.
They can't actually handle their backbenchers. So they're not...
At least we tried. You didn't even bother trying.
We cut the benefits bill by 12 to 15 billion every year.
Anna, you inherited...
COVID.
OK, you had
COVID, Matthew.
You had 3 years after the end of COVID, Anna. You can't just say everything was COVID. COVID was well over by the time that you and the hundreds of other Tory MPs were booted out of office.
One thing that Stephen Timms could have done today, someone who's in charge of this stuff, was to look at a review into the Motability scheme that I mentioned, which is that some people need a car to get around, and I do think, especially if you're talking about people who live in rural areas and all this stuff, I absolutely am not against a scheme in which some people are given help to get a car to get them around. Fine. Not for constipation, though, I think. Exactly. Not for tennis elbow. I mean, if you can afford a tennis membership, then I suspect, really, that you can probably afford at least an old Peugeot or something along those lines. So he decided not to launch a review into that. And I think that's a problem. If we keep going on at this rate, we're going to end up with the majority of people in Britain dependent on the state, I think, Jamie.
Well, I think also the problem here is, where's the ambition going here? So if you've got constipation or you've got a mental health issue, that's fine. We understand that. But plenty of people have those conditions and then are able to go to work and are able to buy a car, save up for a car. I remember being 16 and I was hungry to get a car, couldn't wait to get a car. And what we're doing is we're actually just making an unfair, easy alternative. And I think the worst thing about all of this is not just the unsustainability from a finance perspective, but actually if the population starts to get into a position where this becomes normal, which I fear it is, we're going to have a situation where nobody has ambition.
So, great. Right, so this is it. So, Anna, how have we ended up in a situation where so few people in Britain care enough about the country, dare I say it, their own reputation, and about wider society to get off their backsides and get to work? Where's the shame gone?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think that things were relaxed too much in COVID. We had a very generous approach in COVID to assessments. You know, we got rid of face-to-face assessments. Everything was done online. We're very generous to businesses. I think that has engendered an attitude of the state will provide, and we've got to get rid of that. And I think Kemi's speech was bang on the money today. We've got to stop £1 billion going to foreign nationals. They've paid in nothing. They shouldn't be receiving things.
That's actually some of them will have paid in.
We've got to get back to face-to-face assessments. Fraser Nelson did a great thing in The Spectator. That helps. And we've got to get people back into work.
Which is what the government's programme is all about.
Reforming the fit note.
If more people cared, I think, about their local society, so their area, so if you all knew your neighbours and you all had that proper sense of community, I think there'd be a little bit more shame about, like, oh, you know, so-and-so at number 12 is lazy and could work but doesn't.
The really shocking...
So we've lost that, haven't we? So how do we get that back?
Well, I think the really shocking thing about the figures, which, as Jamie said, is there are a lot of people, is the number of young people in these figures often claiming for mental health conditions which are, you know, an issue. Well, I'm not sure that's... I'm sure, like in everything there are, but they can be short-term, and they certainly don't necessarily mean that you can't go into work with the right support. That's why the government is right to give extra support to people, to get people into work. To say that you can't, because you're at 21, you've got mild depression, doesn't mean you can't work for the rest of your life. And if you don't start working in your 20s, you may need certain adaptations to be made, you may need to make sure you get the right job. But it's all about doing that. The government needs to do that, but it also does need to reduce the overall bill, which the Tories didn't do, and reform will put up by getting rid of the two-child benefit cap.
So the Conservatives' plan, we didn't get into office, fine.
No, you were in office.
The plan, that we didn't get back into office.
I know, but you had your chance.
The plan was, if we had been re-elected, was to reduce the benefits bill by 12 billion by tackling the fact that 94% of doctors are signing these fit notes off. Now, that has got to be dealt with. But one of the bigger problems, if we want to have state-of-the-art hospitals and schools and defence, we've got to have the whole population that can work working.
Yes, I agree.
Nobody's talking about the cost of the economy.
Exactly.
The actual wider cost of the economy.
Yeah, look, and I'm sorry about this, and people might disagree with me for this. I think we need to have more shame on people who are taking the mick. And I think we do. Seriously, I think they should be ridiculed, because there are loads of people out there who are genuinely disabled and need help. And these people who are lazy and using their kids as a cash cow, oh, he's got ADHD. No, he's not. He's naughty. Sort him out, OK? You don't need to go and ponce off the state for the rest of your lives. They're not doing that, and they're giving people who actually need benefits a bad rep, and they're costing people who can be bothered to get off the backsides and work a lot of money. But anyway, rant over with.